Let's unpack today's testimony with criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Andrew Cherkasky, alongside attorney Seth Berenzweig and forensic accountant Bruce Dubinsky. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Andrew, first to you. You've said that this whole case rests on the shoulders of Michael Cohen. After one day of testimony, how do you think the prosecution should feel right now?
Well, they've certainly put forth quite a bit of salacious detail about the inner workings of how this non-disclosure agreement actually came to be. The problem for the prosecution is that they have yet to present evidence, and this is what Donald Trump was saying outside the courtroom, that putting in his books legal expenses as the designation of what this payment was incorrect. And it's interesting we have an accountant on the panel tonight. That's a fundamental issue in the prosecution of this case. They have to prove that that was not only incorrect but fraudulent and intentionally fraudulent. And I'm not sure that the prosecution has presented any evidence that suggests that that should have been something else. And I'm not quite sure what it should have been. As an attorney myself, I'm not sure what I would advise a client who's engaged in a lawful non-disclosure agreement, what they would put on that line. So that's the biggest problem I see for the prosecution, even after a salacious day of testimony from Michael Cohen.
Bruce, as the forensic accountant, do you agree with Andrew's assessment?
I do. Andrew brings up a good point. He talks about intent, and in fraud, you have to prove the intent to defraud. So, I go back to the prosecution hasn't put anything in showing how the payments were actually made. They've been recorded as legal expenses. I think it's important to note that these were from Donald J. Trump's revocable trust and his personal account. So there's an issue of, you can ask yourself, were they deductible payments? And if they were, you would think the IRS would have been all over this a long time ago, and that's not the case. And so the intent, if you look at the intent question of how somebody records something on a set of books and records, if you were going to hide cookies in the kitchen, you wouldn't hide them in a cookie jar, right? Because people would go to the cookie jar looking for cookies. If you're going to hide a payment, you certainly wouldn't hide it in legal expense because that's something people are going to look at. Maybe you bury it in advertising, promotion, something of that nature. So, proving intent, I haven't seen anything from the prosecution that goes to the intent. Much less showing that Donald Trump himself made the decision on how to book these payments on his revocable trust or on a personal financial statement.
Seth, how about you? Do you see the same sort of issue for the prosecution?
Well, I look at it in a very different manner. The prosecution's argument is that this is a deal, a non-disclosure arrangement, based upon a foundation of fraud. Let's zoom out and take a look at it from a transactional standpoint. You have a document that is signed by fictional characters, Peggy Peterson and David Dennison. So right away, in terms of the plumbing, that this is based upon a very irregular set of circumstances. And with these fictional characters, it's funded by a sham shell corporation called Essential Consultants that was set up hurriedly at the last minute by Michael Cohen to supposedly provide legal services in 2016. However, he was already getting paid a salary for providing legal services in 2016. We learned today that in 2017, he was told to not do legal work, although through 2017, every month from the White House, there were signed checks to him for supposed legal services when he was told to not do any legal services. So you have fake parties through a fake company that's funneled through an arrangement that the bank said doesn't apply. This deal has more fiction than an episode of Star Trek. I think the jury's going to have a field day with this to try to see whether or not this is really highly irregular and based upon the prosecution's allegation that it's really just based upon a foundation of fraud.
So, Andrew, to the question of Cohen's conversations with Alan Weisselberg, the former CFO of the Trump Organization, it seems like in their conversations, they were trying to stagger the payments that Cohen was going to get in a certain way to help him fight taxes that he would have to pay on that. And also, when Cohen got that home equity to get the loan to pay Stormy Daniels, he said he did that to partly not let his wife know what he was doing, but also to eliminate a paper trail. Does that not show some intent to try to muddy the water as to what this money was all about?
All good questions, and I'll kind of break it out a little bit. I heard in testimony today, or saw in the reports of testimony today, that what Alan Weisselberg had said in regards to the starting of the payment in that February timeframe in 2017 was that there was some difficulty in essentially transferring Donald Trump to Washington, D.C., all of the paperwork, all of the accounting, and that there might be some backlog in actually getting that started. The fact that there were multiple payments over multiple months for some time afterwards could be interpreted a couple of different ways. It could be interpreted as some sort of idea to stagger in order to deceive. But I think that you can also see it as just kind of monthly payments to pay back an attorney. Attorneys often are paid back after they engage in their legal services and front legal expenses. So kind of two ways to see that part of the Alan Weisselberg piece of it. I think one of the biggest questions is there any chance that he's actually going to testify? Judge Merchant was actually asking about that last week, or made that point last week. So we don't expect to see him, given his status in prison at the moment, but that's certainly a very interesting piece. To your second point, it does seem as though Michael Cohen himself was trying to hide these payments, presumably from his wife, taking out this HELOC without her knowledge. It seems that his kind of setting up of this company and the hiding of some of those transactions may have been for his own personal benefit, to avoid his wife getting mad at him for extending or putting forth his legal expenses, or excuse me, the expenses for the payment of the non-disclosure agreement. And so that's interesting, whether that actually attaches to Donald Trump, or whether that's more of the unreliable, trustworthy Michael Cohen, who had perhaps some self-interest in both getting promoted by Donald Trump and avoiding trouble at home.
Bruce, zeroing in on that point, it seems like repeatedly Cohen tried to make the case on the stand that he wouldn't have done any of this without having Donald Trump sign off on it. In fact, when he was asked if he would have gone to the bank without Trump's approval, he said this, quote, "No, everything required Mr. Trump's sign off. On top of that, I wanted the money back." That's meant to clarify that Cohen, from the prosecution's perspective, wasn't acting on his own. How difficult could it be for the prosecution then to connect the dots to the actual allocation in the records, that these were legal fees? Do you think they're going to have a challenge in differentiating that?
Well, anytime you're in front of a jury, there's a challenge putting financial records up. People don't understand them. You've got to lay them out and make it easy for the jury to understand. I think 2 points I want to go back to. One was the so-called gross up of the reimbursement to Cohen. He said it was grossed up more than he first, right. It was $130,000, then he added $50,000, and I think he even included the wire fee. And then it got grossed up to twice that for quote, taxes. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you do the computation, that would mean the taxes were 70%. We don't live in a country with taxes at 70%. So that doesn't even hold water. You know, there's no doubt from the testimony that I've seen that Cohen probably told Trump what he was doing, certain things, but maybe not every detail. And the question is, did Donald Trump, with intent, tell Cohen to go do this, to hide it this way, to record it, to obfuscate the substance of what was going on? I mean, that's what the jury's going to have to decide at the end of the day. They're going to have to look at the documents. As I said, you know, they're claimed as legal expenses. If you really intended to hide something, you wouldn't put it in a legal expense knowing it was being paid to Michael Cohen. So I think the jury's going to have to take all that into consideration, and the prosecution's going to have to tie it all up in a pretty bow for them to put all these points together so they can understand the true substance of what happened. And that's difficult to do.
Seth, the prosecution's aim here partly is to show that Donald Trump was doing this specifically with the election in mind.
That's right.
Cohen followed up a question about Trump's motivation for getting into this deal with Daniels, saying that, quote, he wasn't thinking about Melania. This was all about the campaign. He went on to say that Trump told him that he should just push it out as long as he could, just pass the election, because if I win, it'll have no relevance because I'm president, and if I lose, I don't even care. How well do you think that might connect with the jury, this idea that Trump specifically was doing this for electoral purposes?
Well, that foots with some of the testimony of Hope Hicks when she was talking about timing and priorities for the former president. And in fact, towards the end of her direct examination, she kind of broke down and started tearing because she realized that that was very impactful. At the end of the day, I think the prosecution has the receipts here. It's going to be a very challenging case. Mr. Trump's represented by excellent defense counsel, so they'll probably get the case and put their case in chief on next week. But the receipts include, for example, a recording of a conversation that Michael Cohen had with Donald Trump talking about the deal. You see the texts and the emails and everything where they laid the foundation before Michael Cohen got on the stand so that they can keep the tempo going and have him just talk about the substance. I thought that was also something that was very interesting to watch. They laid this all out, and frankly, it was all laid out by the end of last week. They covered so much ground, everything last week covered from sex to checks. So they had everything in the hopper, and then when they have the evidentiary house in order, all they need Mr. Cohen to come in is just really just point out the furniture in the house. So I think he's doing that. He'll probably complete his direct examination tomorrow. I will have to respectfully agree to disagree with our other guests, because I think that the prosecution's actually putting on a pretty tight case, and it's pretty consistent, and it foots with the documents. At the end of the day, the jury wants to see the receipts, and the documents are there.